My husband threw me out of the house after winning $10 million in the lottery. You won't see a cent of my money, you fat freeloader, he screamed at me maliciously. But the fool never checked the name on the ticket, and a week later. Sometimes the person sleeping next to you can not only break your heart, they can tear out your soul without raising their voice. Sarah Martinez was 38 years old with the face of a woman who had learned to stay quiet. Not out of cowardice, but for survival. Her eyes, though tired, still held the spark of someone who hadn't resigned herself to being invisible. She had been working for 5 years as a cleaning assistant at the city's general hospital. Night shifts, double shifts, and constant foot pain had become her faithful companion. Her white uniform was always spotless, despite earning a salary that barely covered her basic needs. She lived in a deteriorating middle-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona. Cramped houses, unpainted brick walls, high fences, and neighbors who knew too much but never said anything. Sarah shared a roof with her husband Marcus and their 2 children, 12-year-old David and 7-year-old Emma. Both attended the neighborhood public school. Marcus, on the other hand, spent his days watching television or locked in the bedroom, smoking and blaming the world for his luck. The last time he'd had a formal job was almost a year ago. According to him, bosses were idiots and coworkers were traitors. Since then, his character had turned sour. Arguments were frequent. Screaming, doors slamming, long silences, and veiled threats that, while leaving no physical marks, began to poison everything around them. Sarah had stopped sharing her problems with him. She no longer shared her joys, much less her hopes. Until that Friday, exhausted after 12 hours mopping floors at the hospital, she stopped in front of a convenience store. A fluorescent yellow sign announced the week's jackpot, $10 million. She looked at her wallet. She only had $20. She hesitated, but something inside her, perhaps the desire for a different life, made her reach out and buy a ticket. That night, while Marcus snored with the television on and an empty beer bottle on the nightstand, Sarah left the ticket on the bedside table. She looked at it one last time before going to bed. Then she hugged herself and closed her eyes. She didn't even mention the exact number to Marcus, just said in a low voice, "I bought a lottery ticket just in case." Marcus didn't even flinch. He waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. Days passed. Sarah continued her routine. Work, home, homework with the kids, avoiding Marcus's bad mood. One afternoon, returning from the hospital, she noticed he was different. It wasn't his expression, it was the silence. A tense, cutting silence, the kind that foretells a storm. Marcus was sitting in the dining room, motionless, with the lottery ticket in his hand. The television at full volume was broadcasting the news. The winning number for the national lottery had been 984,176, and that same number was printed perfectly on the ticket he held between his fingers. Sarah felt a small tremor in her knees. She approached, trying to understand. "That's mine," she said without raising her voice. Marcus didn't respond, just looked at her with a dry, dark look, like that of a stranger. She repeated, "I bought that ticket with my last $20. What came next was an explosion of rage, contained for years. Marcus jumped up, threw the chair to the floor, and screamed with a fury that made Emma, who was playing in her room, run out scared. "You think that money belongs to you? You won't see a cent, you fat freeloader. Be grateful I put up with you all these years." Sarah froze. She felt the blood drain from her face. David appeared behind her, his eyes wide as saucers. "Dad, why are you yelling at Mom like that?" But Marcus didn't stop. "This is my house. My rules. You and your brats aren't going to ruin my life right now." Sarah took a step back. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She gripped the back of a chair. "Marcus, that ticket has my name on it. I bought it." "There's no name written on it," he shouted, waving the paper in the air. "And if there was, I'd tear it off your face. Get out. Get out of my house." Now the children began to cry. David hugged his sister, trying to cover her ears. Sarah didn't understand, didn't want to understand. This was her house, her children, her family. But in that instant she understood that she had nothing left. Marcus went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and threw her few belongings on the floor. A broken suitcase, a pair of sneakers, 3 old blouses. He dragged them to the door. Sarah, with her dignity hanging by a thread, bent down to collect them while neighbors began to peek out their windows. "What are you doing, Marcus?" "The kids are watching you," shouted a neighbor from the second floor. "Mind your own business, lady," he replied furiously. "This woman thinks she's going to steal from me." Sarah left with the suitcase in hand. David ran after her. "Mom, don't go. Don't leave us." "I'm not leaving you, my love, never. I just need to think." She walked aimlessly through streets that seemed darker than ever. The city continued its indifferent course. No one stopped to look at a woman with empty eyes and a patched suitcase. She ended up sitting on a park bench. The night's cold seeped into her bones. She hugged her knees and breathed deeply, like someone trying not to break inside. Near midnight, her cell phone vibrated. It was a message from David. "Mom, I love you. Everything's going to be okay. I promise." Sarah broke down crying. There was no force at that moment that could contain what she felt. Marcus, meanwhile, was celebrating at home with a group of friends who didn't even remember his last name. He drank as if the money had always belonged to him. He posted a story on social media with the ticket in his hand, not imagining that on the back, a small line written in pencil said, "Sarah Martinez." August 17th. The ticket remained intact, stored between the pages of a Bible that Sarah used as a safe. Marcus had found it while looking for something to sell. He never stopped to look at the details. He never thought she could claim anything because in his head, she had no right to even her own name. In the park, a woman of about 60 approached Sarah with hot coffee. "Are you okay, honey?" "No, but I will be." "Do you want to tell me about it?" "Not today, maybe tomorrow." Sarah drank the coffee. It tasted like childhood, like what once was. And in that moment, while the city slept and her world seemed to fall apart, she understood that something inside her had awakened. It wasn't hatred nor revenge, it was dignity. And although that night she slept on a bench with wet shoes and her soul in pieces, for the first time in a long time, she dreamed. She dreamed that she got up, dreamed that she returned for her children, and that the ticket that seemed to have left her with nothing would be the beginning of everything she someday deserved. Hashtag chapter 2, the dawn of truth. Dawn didn't bring hope. It brought cold back pain and a metallic the lady jugador for coffee was no longer there. Used some homeless people sleeping on cardboard and the edge of her own thoughts pounding repeatedly in her chest. She got up without destination. She walked through empty streets, wrapped in a jacket that provided no warmth, dragging a suitcase that grew heavier by the minute. She decided to go to her mother's house. She knocked on the door with frozen knuckles. She waited. She heard the shuffling steps behind the door and finally the sound of the door handle. Margaret appeared, a dry woman with a gaze hardened by years. She didn't say good morning. She examined her from top to bottom and crossed her arms. "What happened now?" she asked without surprise. "I need to stay for a few days. Marcus threw me out of the house." Margaret sighed as if she had heard that story 1,000 times. "And now you realize who he is. He told you, Sarah. He warned you when you met him. That man never loved you." "You know, I'm not here for lectures. Use for a roof, ma'am. Use that." Margaret hesitated. She looked at her like looking at an old stone. Finally, she opened the door. Sarah entered. There smelled of burnt onions and disappointment. She went straight to the couch and collapsed. Margaret sat in a chair, crossed her legs, and lit a cigarette. "And the children? He wouldn't let me take them. And you left without fighting." Sarah looked at her with empty eyes that were crying. He had no strength left. He felt dead. "And what are you going to do now?" "I don't know." Margaret slowly released the smoke. "Well, you better figure it out soon, because you're not staying here forever." The stab in Sarah's stomach was instantaneous. Not even in her own blood did she find comfort. That was asked for as refuge at a price she wasn't willing to pay, contempt disguised as help. She endured 2 nights. On the third, she decided to leave. She searched the internet from an internet cafe for shelter for women victims of violence. She found one 6 blocks from the hospital. She knocked on the door with fear. She was attended by a woman of about 40, brown skin, deep eyes, firm expression. You're Sarah. Yes, they told me you help here. I'm Rachel. Come in. The place was an old house adapted with love. Sisterhood posters on the walls, photographs of smiling women. A kitchen that smelled of hot soup. Children running. Tears shared in silence. Sarah felt that for the first time in days, she could breathe. Rachel led her to her office. She took out a notebook and began to write. Full name, Sarah Martinez. 838. Physical, emotional, economic violence. Sarah hesitated. Emotional and economic. It threw me out of the house in front of my children. Rachel nodded. Do you have a proof? No, used my words. And the lottery ticket he bought that I kept. Rachel looked up. Lottery? Yes. He bought a ticket a week ago with my last $20. He left it at home. It won 10 million and I kept it. He threw me out, insulted me. He said he didn't deserve anything. Rachel was silent for a few seconds. Then, slowly, she took off her glasses and looked at her with something more than attention. She looked at her with humanity. Do you know what that means? What? That you not only suffered emotional abuse, but also theft. If the ticket is in your name, that money is legally yours. Sarah felt electricity run through her skin. She hadn't thought of that as a possibility. In her head, she had lost everything. But Rachel was talking about laws, papers, justice. And if nobody believes me, if I say I bought it. You said you bought it with your last $20. Do you have a proof? Y podcast. Refate. It was at a convenience store. Rachel observed her carefully. Sarah, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Do you want justice or revenge? Sarah didn't respond immediately. She took out of her pocket a wrinkled photo. Her children, and Marcus in the park. An old photo from happy times that no longer existed. He wanted him to look me in the eyes and realize he has nothing. That's what he want. Rachel closed her notebook. That's called emotional justice, and I'm going to help you. Meanwhile, in the house that advanced Sarah's, Marcus was toasting with strangers, young women, friends from nowhere, smoke, loud music, champagne bottles, and empty premises. He had hired a photographer to set up a session as the neighborhood's new millionaire. He posted phrases on social media like life goes in circles or from 0 to 100 without stops. His ego floated above everyone. He received messages from women who had never spoken to him. They invited him to dinners, they flattered him. He had bought a sports car, although he didn't know how to drive. He hired a chauffeur. He wore fake watches and borrowed gold chains. He became a viral character, but calls started coming. First anonymous, then insistent. At first, he thought they were pranks. Then they started leaving messages that made him uncomfortable. We know that ticket isn't yours. Enjoy while you can. Money don't clear misery. The truth always comes out. Marcus began to change locks, install cameras, become paranoid. He didn't sleep, suspected everyone, even his brother Daniel, to whom he had entrusted the administration of part of the money. Daniel, who had a snacky smile, began moving money without Marcus noticing. But he didn't know it yet. Sarah at the shelter spent nights with other women. Were stories, similar pans. One of them had a scar on her forehead, another hadn't spoken for weeks. Rachel organized talks, workshops, safe spaces. Little by little, Sarah began to return to herself. She learned about rights, about legal processes. She found out that if she could prove she bought the ticket, she could claim the full price. She then remembered that she had written her name on the back of the ticket in pen filled out of a bit. A detail that could change everything. Rachel smiled when she told her. That name written could be key. Are you willing to fight? Yes. Then we're going to do this right. Without scandals, without emotions, with intelligence. Sarah wrote a letter to her children. She couldn't see them yet. Marcus wouldn't allow it, but she wanted them to know she hadn't abandoned them. Rachel managed to deliver it through a neighborhood woman, a lady who had also suffered violence in the past and now became a silent ally. Emma cried when she read it. David kept it under his pillow. Sarah also began to build her new identity. Not used legally, but internally. She was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the woman who decided to rebuild herself from the ashes. She began writing in a notebook, talking with other women, healing. One night, Rachel entered the dining room and turned on the television. Marcus appeared on the news. The new rich guy, the type who changed his luck, who was now a cryptocurrency entrepreneur. Sarah watched him in silence. How does it make you feel to see him like this? Rachel asked. Like all of this is a movie, but this time I don't want to be the victim. I want to be the one writing the script. Rachel handed her an envelope. This is for you. It's a copy of the game plan we're going to file. But first, there is something else. Sarah looked at her attentively. What? A journalist became interested in your case. She wants to tell your story anonymously as part of a campaign about economic violence. Are you up for it? Sarah hesitated. Then nodded. Let the world know, because what I did to me is done to many others. That night, Sarah dreamed again, but she no longer dreamed that she was getting up, she was already standing. She dreamed that she was running, that her children were waiting for her in a new house, that life, though cruel, could still be used. And on the other side of the city, Marcus woke up in a cold sweat after a nightmare in which he lost everything in front of a crowd that laughed at him. The game was just beginning, and they didn't even know it. Almohadilla Chapter 3, The Reckoning. Marcus woke up sweating with sweat stuck to his body and a constant ringing in his ears. He had dreamed he was standing in the middle of a plaza, naked, with the lottery ticket disintegrating in his hands. Around him, a crowd laughed at him, pointing, shouting thief. He got up abruptly, without looking at the time, and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected back a tired Maya, with dark circles, new wrinkles, and a disheveled leather that could no longer be hidden behind styling or imported cologne. He splashed cold water on his face and returned to bed. A young woman tattooed up to her neck was sleeping beside him. He didn't even remember her name. He had met so many into 6 weeks that he had lost count. Women came and went like the smoke from the cigarettes and now smoked incessantly. Money had turned him into a caricature of himself. He had cars, shiny watches, a new house in a private neighborhood, although he hadn't finished paying for it. He signed contracts without reading them, recommended by him and didn't know well. Neighborhood people who appeared magically with shark smiles and promises to multiply his fortune. He believed them. They called him entrepreneur, investor, and they smiled like a child with a new toy. Everyone wanted to be closer to the new millionaire, though no one really respected him. His brother Daniel was one of the first to arrive. He visited him as soon as he heard about the prize. He told him he was happy for him, that it was his blood, that he had always known Marcus was destined for something great. Marcus, hungry for validation, believed him without reservation. He entrusted him with the administration of part of the money, signed legal powers, opened accounts abroad in his name. Daniel pretended to be a financial expert. In reality, he was an opportunist without scruples. While Marcus played at being famous, Daniel slowly moved money, small transfers, fictitious investments, phantom accounts. In one of those afternoons of supposed advisory, Marcus told Daniel, "I'm thinking of buying a yacht or maybe opening a nightclub, something big, so people see I'm not the same as before." Daniel looked at him with that enigmatic smile that was already part of his disguise. "Sure, brother, whatever you want, but first let's secure your money. Don't end up like those who win the lottery and in 2 years are worse off than before." Marcus laughed without worry. "That will never happen to me." Daniel just nodded while in his mind he was already counting what would soon be his. Meanwhile, David and Emma lived trapped between abandonment and resentment. Marcus attacked them to the new apartment, a tower with a gym and pool, but didn't pay attention to them. He promised to take them to Disney. He never bought the tickets. He swore they would soon have the best toys, the best clothes, but only used them to post photos showing how well he was doing as a successful single father. One night, David looked at him straight from the couch. He was 12 years old, but at the eyes of a tired adult. "Dad, why isn't the mom here if she bought the ticket?" Marcus tensed. The glass he was holding trembled slightly in his hand. He turned with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Don't repeat that. Says nobody. She left. She didn't want this life. She didn't want to fight with me. That's not true. I told you not to repeat that. Emma began to cry silently. David hugged her, and Marcus locked himself in his room. He couldn't stand anyone questioning his version. He had convinced himself that he had won the money by destiny, by deserving it, that Sarah was a burden, and unsure he had finally released. In another corner of the city, Sarah held a sheet of paper in her hands. It was the acceptance letter to initiate the legal process. Rachel looked at her with content pride. Today you take the first step, not toward revenge, toward truth. Sarah nodded. She no longer trembled, no longer spoke with a broken voice. Something in her gaze had changed. She was the same woman, but with a different flame in her eyes. Rachel, meanwhile, had contacted a journalist named Lisa, specialized in women's rights. Lisa had also been a victim of economic violence. She became obsessed with Sarah's case from the moment she heard it. It was just a strong story. It was an X-ray of thousands of invisible women who were dispossessed without leaving a trace. Lisa asked to interview her. Sarah accepted on the condition that her face and name not be revealed. The documentary began to be recorded at the shelter with testimonies from other women. It was also a time bomb, a mirror for society. Lisa presented it as stolen money, when violence leaves no bruises. Sarah's story became the connecting thread. Meanwhile, Marcus was beginning to notice that something didn't fit. Calls from unknown numbers, messages signed disturbing phrases. One night he found a sign at his apartment door with one word written by hand, thief. No accent mark on purpose to make it hit more as if it came from someone who didn't even bother to spell correctly to insult him. It was raw, direct contempt. He entered the apartment like a hurricane, checked everything, screamed, hit the table. David watched him from the hallway. What's wrong, Dad? Nothing. Go to sleep. But Marcus couldn't sleep, not that night or the next. Paranoia grew. He had alarms installed. He asked Daniel to investigate if anyone was speaking ill of him. Daniel told him not to worry, but the next day the main bank account showed strange movements. He called the bank. He didn't understand anything they told him. They had transferred money to an international account in the name of a company he didn't know. He called Daniel. He didn't answer. Sarah, meanwhile, was receiving support messages from other women who had seen the documentary preview. Women from poor neighborhoods, offices, towns. They told her they felt represented, that she gave them back strength. Sarah began to feel that her story no longer belonged only to her. It was part of something bigger. The lawyer that Rachel had contacted confirmed that if they could prove the ticket was bought by Sarah, Marcus could not only lose the money but face charges for unlawful appropriation. Everything depended on one proof, the name written on the back. Rachel picked up the phone, called the notary in charge of verifying the ticket when it was cast. Do you remember if the ticket had any inscription? He didn't review it completely, used the numbering on the front. But if it has it, it's all be stored in the archive. I need you to check it. It's urgent. The notary nodded. 2 days later, he called back. Yes, the ticket is scanned on both sides. There is a name in pencil, almost erased. It says Sarah Martinez, with a date. Rachel smiled like someone seeing a crack in a concrete wall. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands. She cried silently. It was real. She had proof, the most important one. Marcus, for his part, received a letter that same week. A white envelope, no visible sender. Inside there was a judicial notification, lawsuit for illegal appropriation of goods. The document had Sarah's name in large letters. The rest became blurry to his eyes. He remained still, breathing heavily. He locked himself in the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror. The same mirror where months ago he felt invincible. That face now seemed like someone defeated before starting the battle. He dialed Daniel's number. It rang twice. Then an automatic recording came on. The number does not exist. He called the financial institution. They informed him that Daniel had withdrawn all the money from the secondary account 3 days ago. Marcus felt his knees weaken. He leaned on the sink, then screamed with a force that made the walls tremble. David and Emma got scared. She ran to her room. David looked at him from the bathroom door. What's wrong, Dad? Marcus turned around. His eyes were bloodshot. Nothing, nothing. Everything's fine. David looked at him for another second, then said, Mom didn't scream like that, and she left. That night Marcus didn't sleep. The next day he reviewed every contract, called everyone. No one answered him. The supposed investor was no longer there. The tattooed woman was gone too. His parties were over. Friends disappeared. Making messages returned. Sarah was preparing her statement. The lawyer explained the step to her. They weren't just seeking to recover the money. They wanted to set a legal precedent. It was a battle that could change many lives. The documentary would be published a week later, right after the initial hearing. The mask of success was beginning to fall. Marcus could no longer stand the lie, and what was coming he couldn't even imagine it yet. Justice don't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the form of paper, in the name of a woman who was expelled, humiliated, and who now returned not to beg, but to claim what was always hers. And the first blow was already on its way. Sarah wasn't just coming back. She was coming back with a truth impossible to erase. Almohadilla chapter 4, the courtroom revelation. The judicial notification had exploded in Marcus' hands like a silent bomb. The envelope was white, unadorned, but inside it carried a thread that all his false power couldn't control. His hands trembled as he read his full name printed in black ink, Marcus Anthony Rivera, defendant for unlawful appropriation, economic and emotional violence. At the bottom, the sender wasn't a common law firm. It was the name of a woman he had erased from his life as if she were used to understand, Sarah Martinez. He screamed, threw the envelope against the wall, paced back and forth like a caged animal. He called the lawyer who had helped him close certain shady contracts when he started moving money without declaring it. But this time the voice on the other end of the line was dry, distant. This is another league, Marcus. You don't get involved in cases with violence involved, much less when there is legal evidence. I'm paying you. Solve it. Not anymore. I'm sorry. You're on your own in this. Eun up. Marcus threw the phone against the floor, and it broke into 3 pieces. Then he looked at his hands, open, empty. He felt everything slipping away from him, that every decision made since touching that cursed ticket brought him closer to the abyss. At the other end of the city, Sarah held her statement in her hands. It was a simple paper, but every word written there was a wound closing. Rachel accompanied her without saying anything, as she said todo when silence was worth more than any speech. Outside, in the courthouse hall, several journalists waited for the start of a hearing that was already trending on social media. The documentary about Sarah had exploded. It was shared in women's groups, universities, alternative media. Thousands commented, cried, remembered. Some even called her a symbol of resistance. But Sarah didn't want to be a symbol of anything. She just wanted justice and her children. She entered the courtroom with a firm step. The judge, a man with a neutral expression and thick glasses, looked at her attentively. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later in a wrinkled suit and a swollen face. He brought with him a new lawyer, young, nervous, hired that same morning with what little remained of his fortune. Marcus didn't greet Sarah or anyone. His gas was a dark well. The judge called for silence. We will begin the preliminary hearing of the case Martinez vs. Rivera. The parties are present. We begin. Sarah stood up. The judge asked her to speak. She took a breath and without raising her voice began. My name is Sarah Martinez. I am a mother, a woman, and a survivor. For years he lived next to a man who made me believe he was worth nothing. That everything he did was insignificant. That my work wasn't real. That my decisions didn't count. When he bought that lottery ticket, he did it dreaming of giving my children a better life. In every mind it would be the excuse for them to destroy me. I don't want his money. It don't interest me. I want to get my children back. I want him to face justice for everything he took from me in silence. Because economic violence is also violence. Because many women like me are dispossessed every day without anyone hearing them. She paused, her gaze fixed on Marcus, who couldn't stand it, just lowered his head uncomfortably. Sarah breathed and closed with a phrase that disarmed everyone in the room. He never wanted his money. I just want my children to know that their mother was never afraid of other, but a strong woman who chose to get up. The silence was absolute. The judge nodded and turned his gaze toward Marcus. Mr. Rivera, you have the floor. Marcus stood up. His voice sounded forced. That's a lie. Susan this to make me look bad. He won that money. She didn't even know how the lottery worked. He was the one who cashed the ticket. He did it legally. Do you have a proof that you bought it? Oh, no. But neither do I. Sarah's lawyer stood up. With the court's permission, yes, she does. We will present the scanned images of the original ticket archived by the lottery office, where Sarah Martinez's name can be clearly read-written on the back with a date prior to the drawing. The judge took the documents, observed them carefully, passed them to his assistant, then looked at Marcus. Do you wish to respond? That could be fake. She could have written it afterward. It's a trap. The judge interrupted him. It was scanned by the official entity before its collection. The original archive confirms it. Mr. Rivera, you are in a very serious situation. I recommend you measure your words. Marcus sat down abruptly. It was pale. For the first time, his discourse was wavering. And no longer had arguments, only lie. The hearing continued with testimonies. Rachel testified about the conditions in which Sarah arrived at the shelter. Then two neighbors spoke. One told how she witnessed the humiliation when he threw her out of the house with insults. The other narrated how, for years, Sarah was the one who sustained the household while Marcus worked on projects that never existed. But the unexpected came at the end. The judge called a last witness. Her name wasn't in the initial documents. She was proposed by Sarah's defense that same morning. When she entered the courtroom, Marcus stood up as if he had seen a ghost. It was Miranda, one of his lovers, the same one who posted photos with him on social media, the one he called the true queen of his life. Sarah looked at her with a mixture of surprise and sadness. Miranda approached the witness stand. Her appearance was different. She wore no makeup. Her dress was simple, her gaze opaque. The judge asked her to speak. I've known Mr. Rivera for 5 months. We began a relationship. I didn't know there were children involved, much less that he had thrown his wife out of his house. I found out through social media. At first he denied it, but then when he started running out of money, his attitude changed. He became aggressive. One day we argued over a message I received. He pushed me against the wall. He left me a bruise. I didn't file a complaint. I was scared. But when I saw the documentary about Sarah, I knew I had to be here. Marcus jumped up from his chair. That's a lie. That didn't happen. The judge struck the table. Silence in the courtroom. Miranda continued. I have recorded messages, audios where he mocks her children, where he says that if he could make her disappear, he would. I turned them over to the prosecutor's office. They're in your hands. The courtroom erupted. Murmurs. Cross glances. The judge called for order. Marcus was pale, trembling. His new lawyer lowered his head, aware that the case was lost. Sarah didn't smile, didn't feel vengeful, just sad about everything. About the lost time, about the children trapped in the middle, about the damage no one could erase. The hearing ended with a preliminary resolution. The judge recognized Sarah's name on the ticket as sufficient proof to initiate the money recovery process and suspended Marcus's access to linked accounts. Additionally, he granted Sarah temporary custody of the children until the complete trial was resolved. Marcus could not approach her or communicate in any way. When Sarah left the courthouse, a small crowd was waiting for her. Common people, women with signs. Some were crying, others applauding. They weren't followers, they were survivors. A woman approached her. Thank you for not giving up, for speaking out. Sarah touched her hand. I don't speak for myself, I speak for all of us. That night, while preparing to sleep in the shelter room, she received a message. It was from David. It simply said, I saw you on TV. I love you, Mom. Sarah pressed the phone to her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't have everything, but she had the most important thing. The beginning of something new. A truth that no one could erase, and this time silence wouldn't quiet her. #Chapter 5, the final verdict. The next morning brought a warm breeze, as if the air had decided to treat her gently. She woke up before the rest, walked barefoot through the shelter hallway, and stopped in front of the small mirror in the kitchen. She wasn't the same woman who had arrived weeks ago. She no longer feared her reflection. She no longer looked for flaws or hid from her thoughts. Now she looked for reasons, purposes, and above all, a plan. The trial was held in a higher-ranking court. It was no longer a preliminary hearing. Now, justice had to pronounce definitively. Marcus arrived in a rented suit, with deep dark circles and no accompanying lawyer. No one accompanied him. His new attorney no longer had the same enthusiasm as before. There was no possible defense. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies multiple, and his public image was destroyed. The documentary continued circulating on social media, converted into a symbol of struggle. It was shared by women's associations, lawyers, judges, and by hundreds of people who had never heard of Sarah, but who now recognized her on the street. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. Sarah sat in the front row with Rachel by her side. She wore a white blouse and carried a simple folder in her hands. She had no jewelry, no makeup. She didn't need ornaments to demonstrate who she was. Her presence spoke for her. The judge reviewed every detail. The ticket registered in her name, the scanned evidence, Marcus's financial movements, Miranda's statement, the audio recordings delivered, the public humiliations, the abandonment of his children. Everything was documented. The judge took a pause before reading the verdict, as if the air also needed to prepare. Based on the evidence presented and the testimonies gathered, this court determines that Mr. Marcus Rivera incurred an unlawful appropriation, fraudulent conduct, and economic and emotional violence toward Mrs. Sarah Martinez. He is sentenced to pay a compensatory fine of a millionaire nature. All his bank accounts are frozen. An immediate seizure of the property located in the Lakewood Estates gated community is decreed. Likewise, a restraining order is established whereby the accused may not approach within 300 meters of Mrs. Martinez or her children for a minimum period of 5 years. Marcus said nothing, just lowered his head. The sound of the ruling fell like a gavel. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't protest. He knew it was all over. Deep down, he knew this had begun the day he threw Sarah onto the street like garbage. That was the beginning of the end. Sarah left the courthouse in silence. Some media were waiting for her. She didn't speak to the cameras, only to a little girl who approached her shyly with a drawing in her hands. The paper showed a woman with a cape surrounded by hearts. Sarah received it with moist eyes. "Thank you," she told her. "Is it for me?" "Yes. My mom says you're very brave." Sarah knelt down and hugged her. She didn't respond with words, just closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the moment. The news of the ruling traveled through national media. Within hours, Sarah's story stopped being just a case of violence to become a social phenomenon. Interviews began to arrive, invitations, but Sarah didn't want sensationalist cameras or programs. She wanted something real, something that would last more than a few seconds of fame. With Rachel's support and part of the money she recovered after the trial, she founded an organization called Open Doors, a space for women victims of economic and emotional violence. The objective was clear: offer shelter, legal guidance, psychological support, and above all, a real network that functioned beyond beautiful speeches. She gave the first workshop herself. It was a small room with recycled chairs and cups of warm coffee. In front of her, 8 women listened in silence, all with different stories, all with the same look. Sarah sat down and began to speak without paper, without prepared speech. For a long time I thought I wasn't enough, that if I stayed quiet he would change, that if I was patient, if I was good, if I sacrificed myself, everything would be fixed. I was wrong. Sometimes silence doesn't save, sometimes silence kills. But I learned something important. We are not the scars that others left us. We are the hands that today write a new story. And that story begins with the decision not to live in fear. One of the women broke down crying. Another clenched her fists. Sarah understood in that instant that she had found her place. Not as a victim, not as a heroine, as a bridge. Marcus, for his part, lived in a rented room in the back of a hardware store. He had no car, no friends, no money. Daniel had disappeared. He took everything that was left in the accounts and didn't even bother to leave him a note. He tried to contact him several times, but the number was out of service. Messages were ignored. No one in the family wanted to talk to him. He had been left alone, and now without masks, he faced himself and didn't like what he saw. He looked for jobs. No one would hire him. His face was on the internet linked to scandals. Even the women he used to surround himself with now blocked him. Miranda had publicly come out to tell her story. They called him an aggressor, a scammer. Insults rained down on him on social media. He lived in fear of going out, fear of being recognized, fear even of himself. One night, drunk, he recorded a video on his phone. "People judge me. All of you don't know what it was like living with her. I also suffered. I also have the right to be happy." But seeing himself on screen, he didn't recognize himself. Not even he believed his own words. He closed the phone and cried for the first time without screaming. Just in silence. David and Emma were already living with Sarah. The reunion was intimate, loaded with contained emotion. David hugged her for 5 minutes without letting go. Emma couldn't stop talking as if she had everything stored in her chest. Sarah listened to them, kissed them, made them hot chocolate, and promised them something she could keep. "We will never live in fear again." With part of the money, she rented a small but warm house, white walls, plants on the balcony, a kitchen that smelled like home. David had a bicycle. Emma painted her own pictures. They didn't have luxuries, but they had peace. And that was new. Rachel continued to accompany her in everything. They had become sisters of cause, of path, of pain and struggle. There were projects, expansion plans, collaborations with other organizations. Sarah was no longer just a viral story. She was a transformed woman. One night, while sweeping the patio, David approached her. "Mom, do you regret having been with Dad?" Sarah stopped. She looked him in the eyes. "No, because from all the bad came you too, and you and your sister are the best thing that has happened to me." David nodded. "I miss him, but I also understand. I don't want to go back with him anymore." "You don't have to choose. He will always be your father. But you choose what kind of man you want to be." "I want to be like you." Sarah hugged him. She said nothing. There were no words for a moment like that. Time began to pass. The foundation grew. The documentary was awarded prizes. Sarah was invited to speak at international forums, but she always returned home. To the small gestures, to the hugs, to the stories of real women who, like her, one day said enough. And Marcus, in the shadows, was still there, watching from afar as the woman he tried to erase had built an empire with what he despised. Every now and then he saw her face on television, on social media, in the news, and he lowered his head. He no longer screamed, no longer complained, just stayed quiet. The price of his arrogance wasn't just losing money, it was losing everything. Respect, family, dignity. He was left with the echo of a life that no longer belonged to him. And Sarah could finally sleep peacefully, not because the past had disappeared, but because for the first time she had faced it and defeated it. #epilogue, new beginnings. The mornings in the new house weren't luxurious, but they had a harmony that hadn't existed before. The aroma of toasted bread mixed with Emma's laughter, who used to sing softly while setting the table. David watered the plants in the small garden he had helped plant with his own hands. It was a modest house with light walls and large windows, but every corner spoke of reconstruction, of love replanted after disaster. Sarah walked barefoot on the wooden floor, coffee cup in hand, hair loose and forehead high. She had bought that house with part of the recovered money, but it wasn't the money that made it valuable. It was everything it had cost to get there. Every installed tile, every chosen piece of furniture represented freedom. Outside, the sun began to peek through, and the world kept turning. But now, for the first time in a long time, it turned without crushing her. The Open Doors Foundation had grown beyond what she imagined. What began as a support network for women now had locations in 3 other cities. They held workshops, legal consultations, art and self-care sessions. Sarah had managed to unite a team of professionals who worked with vocation, not for salary. Women and men who had lived firsthand what it means to be on the other side of social indifference. Rachel became her formal partner. Together, they had organized a national event called Voices That Won't Be Silenced. Thousands of women signed up. It was an unprecedented call, and the media covered it as an emotional revolution. During the preparations, Sarah stopped for a moment and observed the magnitude of what they were creating. Behind the stage, surrounded by technicians, lights, and posters with fighting phrases, Rachel approached her with a sincere smile. "Do you realize what you've done?" Sarah lowered her gaze, almost embarrassed. "I didn't do it alone, but no one did it for you." On stage, the team was making final adjustments. Sarah breathed deeply. It was the first time she would speak in front of so many people, not as a victim, but as someone who transformed her pain into an engine. The event, Voices That Won't Be Silenced, was bigger than they expected. The auditorium filled with more than 3,000 women. Sarah went up on stage to applause. She carried no written speech. She spoke from the soul. "They taught us to be quiet, to endure, to justify them. They told us that violence only counts if there's blood, but blood isn't always visible. Sometimes you bleed inside and nobody notices. I lived many years in silence, thinking that love was sacrifice, that being broken was normal, that fear was part of being a woman, until I saw myself on a park bench with a broken suitcase and dignity in pieces. And that day, I decided that no one else was going to tell my story for me. That day, I began to write it. There was absolute silence. Some cried, others held hands. When she finished, the auditorium exploded in applause. Shouts of encouragement were heard, names Sarah didn't know, but that embraced her with their gaze. After the event, a publisher contacted her to turn her story into a book. Sarah hesitated, not out of shame, but out of respect. She knew it wasn't just her story, it was that of many. She accepted on the condition of including real testimonials from other women. The book was called What We Keep Silent for Love. It was an unexpected success. Social media baptized her as the woman who defeated a millionaire's ego. Sarah didn't like the title. She felt it reduced everything to a conflict with Marcus, but she understood that for many, her story represented a battle won in the name of all those who couldn't tell it. The book was translated into 3 languages. Fragments were read in universities. It became a topic of debate. But Sarah continued going every morning to the community center, making coffee, listening to stories, caressing silences. One night, while arranging some books in the foundation's library, David entered the room. He already had an adolescent voice. The change was noticeable, but he still preserved that deep look, so similar to his mother's. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy?" Sarah remained still. She thought about everything that had happened, about the sleepless nights, the insults, the trial, the women she had embraced, her children growing up without fear. She didn't respond immediately. "I'm not happy. I'm at peace," which is better than happiness, because no one can take peace away from you. David smiled. He said nothing more, approached and hugged her tightly. Meanwhile, in his room, Marcus saw a fragment of the event on the internet. It had reached him by chance. His hand trembled seeing Sarah on stage, illuminated, applauded. On his face there was no longer anger, just emptiness. He turned off the phone and remained silent. He remembered the times he told her she was worthless, that nobody would listen to her, that she was alone. Now the one who was alone was him. Life hadn't taken everything from him as punishment. It took it away to show him that you don't build a house with foundations of contempt. Sarah, for her part, returned home that night. She prepared Emma's favorite dessert. She helped David with a school project. Then she sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs and a cup of tea. The moon was full, the wind gentle, and for the first time in many years she felt no fear, no anxiety, no guilt, just gratitude. Because in the end, when life tears everything away from you, it also gives you the opportunity to rebuild from the truth. And that truth, even though it hurts, always ends up setting you free. Sarah woke up before dawn, as she had been doing for months. No longer from anxiety or habit, but from desire. She liked that moment of the day when the world hadn't yet shaken off its own noises. She put on her robe, made coffee, and went out to the porch in silence. The fresh morning air caressed her face gently. It was as if life, in a silent gesture, reminded her that it was still there, that now it was hers. She was 39 years old. Her face had changed, not because of wrinkles, but because of serenity. She no longer needed to defend herself from everything. She no longer carried the need to prove anything to anyone. She had discovered that true triumph isn't recognition, but calm. Not revenge, but dignity. That day, without planning it, she opened a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Letter to who I was and to who will come after me." She began to write without filter, as if her soul were dictating it. Not to publish, not to give talks, but to leave something that perhaps someone would read when they needed it most. Dear you, yes, you, the one who is silent, enduring, the one who smiles so as not to make others uncomfortable, the one who says it's not that bad, while feeling her soul fall apart inside. I was also that one, the one who justified screams, the one who blamed herself for everything, the one who believed that loving was losing herself. To you I speak. You're not alone, you're not crazy, you're not exaggerating. You're just trapped in a lie they taught us from childhood. That being a good woman is enduring. It's not. Enduring is not loving. Being silent is not peace. Giving in is not balance. I learned that no one has the right to step on you, neither with sweet words nor with cutting words. I learned that money, fear, what people will say, are not chains. They are excuses that society has given us to keep us quiet. But the soul wasn't born to be caged. When the soul screams, it doesn't ask for noise. It asks for freedom. If you're reading this and something in your chest moves, listen to it, because that tremor is your signal. You're not alone. She signed the letter and kept it. She thought about publishing it. She wouldn't do it yet. Valuable things needed to rest. At noon, David asked her if they could go eat at the beach. She had always loved the sea. She had always felt it as her refuge, even before knowing why. They prepared sandwiches, orange juice, and a blanket. Emma brought her paints. They spent hours without a clock, without obligations. Just the three of them, the sound of the waves, and the open sky. "Mom," asked Emma with her face stained with paint, "do you think all of this had to happen?" Sarah looked at her without responding immediately, then nodded slowly. "I think it did, because if it hadn't happened, we would still be living a lie." Emma didn't understand completely, but she smiled anyway. David understood completely. Sarah observed the sea and thought about time, about how she had gone from being invisible to being a symbol, from being silenced to being voice. She hadn't planned anything. She had just been faithful to herself. Rachel called her that afternoon. She had been nominated for an international prize for her work in human rights. They wanted Sarah to accompany her to Brussels to receive it together. She didn't hesitate. She accepted not out of vanity, but because she understood she was no longer alone in this. What they had created wasn't hers, it was everyone's. While Sarah lived a present full of purpose, Marcus survived among ruins. His room remained the same. Rent was late every month. He ate what he could, sometimes what he found. He had tried making deliveries with a borrowed motorcycle, but nobody trusted him. His face generated rejection. That night he opened his old laptop. On the screen, YouTube recommended the documentary that had destroyed him. He hesitated. His first impulse was to close the tab, but something inside him asked him to watch, to listen. He hit play. The video began with Sarah's voice, soft, without resentment. When they tell you that you're worth nothing, many times you end up believing it. The hardest thing wasn't that he threw me out. It was that I no longer knew how to defend myself from myself. Marcus felt a knot in his throat. He fast-forwarded a few minutes. Images of the old house appeared, of the children, of the door closing in her face. He looked at his own hands. She had loved those hands, but he had also used them to push, to close, to push away. When the video ended, he didn't cry from rage or shame. He cried with a new, deep, silent cry. For the first time, he understood what he had done. For the first time, he didn't justify himself. He wrote a message. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve for you to read me, but I saw the video and today I understood many things. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just thank you for leaving, because if you hadn't left, I would still be that monster. Take care of them and take care of yourself. I'll make sure not to hurt them again. Sarah read the message that night. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. What she needed, she already had. And it was there in her clean bed, in the notebook on her table, in Emma's drawings, in David's laughter. In the voices of hundreds of women who came to the foundation with dimmed eyes and left with their heads high. The next morning, Sarah went for a walk alone on the beach. The sea was serene. She sat on the sand and took out a new notebook. She wrote a single sentence. The story ended. Then she crossed it out. The story has just begun. She looked at the horizon and closed her eyes. She finally understood that life isn't fair, but sometimes, just sometimes, life gives you back what the soul truly deserves. And she smiled, because sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself, because those who walk alone go further. Asterisk, what did you think of this story? There are many people who, like Sarah Martinez, are living silent battles every day. Our hope is that her voice has also resonated within you. Asterisk. Asterisk, if this story touched your heart, share it. Make more people feel accompanied. Be part of the change. Asterisk. Asterisk, tell us in the comments what you would have done in her place. From what city are you watching us? Reading you makes us feel closer to you. Asterisk. Asterisk, and if you haven't done it yet, give it a like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Every gesture of yours is a signal that these stories should continue being told. Asterisk. Asterisk, don't leave yet. Our next moving story is already appearing on your screen. Click on any of them and continue exploring this universe of real, moving, and necessary stories. Asterisk. Asterisk, thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling with us. We send you a huge hug wherever you are. See you in the next one. Asterisk.